Okay, well, thank you so much. And thank you for the introduction. And I know I'm the last presenter today, so I'm between you and probably like snacks or a drink or something that's much more fun than zero trust. But I'm hoping today we're going to turn a topic that seems really complex and convoluted into something that you can understand. So zero trust has definitely become a major trend in the security space. There's a lot of uncertainty about what zero trust means. Is it a technology? Is it an architecture? Is it an approach? At its core, zero trust is really about fundamentally changing our philosophy to how we approach enterprise security, namely access. As Rob mentioned, my name is Carlene Secchi, and I'm the Executive Vice President of Strategy for Tantus. Security is something that I really hold near and dear to my heart, and I get really passionate about. Most recently speaking at the CFO Officer Consortium, presenting on challenges facing federal IT security systems today, and then also at CMS Security Training Day. So talking today a little bit about zero trust, here's some of the items that we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the landscape and what's really created this need for the concept of zero trust, why we need it, especially in healthcare settings, and potential impacts on usability. A lot of times when we think about security, there's a lot of friction between compliance and usability from the end users. So it's something that we definitely have to address. So my goal is that when you leave here today, you know what zero trust is and you understand some of the pieces that go into achieving a zero trust architecture. So let's start with the security landscape today. To understand why we need zero trust, I think it's really helpful to understand what we're facing today, because it's really, really different and it's changed pretty dramatically over the last 2 years. First of all, the networks are storing more and more vital and personal information, which really increases the impact of breaches when they occur. Breaches can access personal information, disrupt major public services, and bring supply chains to a complete halt. Add to that ransomware attacks are on the rise. According to the FBI, as many as 2,048 ransomware complaints were registered in 2021 alone. With so many devices and properly designed access control systems, users are constantly having to change and create new passwords. Think about when you get that reminder from IT that it's time to change your password. We're all like, oh my gosh, right? And we're scrambling to come up with something unique, or we write it down on a sticky and stick it on our laptop. These really create a new and different kind of threats. And in fact, password compromises are one of the most common way that companies and organizations are breached today. COVID has also accelerated the pace at which the workforce has adopted work from home and remote work, meaning we don't just have to protect a single network or set of devices coming through a single source. And finally, increased reliance on devices connecting to the internet or the network create a hotbed of potential threat sources. For example, think about your office the last time we were all in there, right? How many devices were connecting to the internet? You have laptops, mobile phones, printers. We have maybe even sign-in devices that print our badges. Even the coffee maker is connected to the internet. And these are all potential access points for hackers. So to answer all of these concerns and all of these risks, security and IT teams are forced to string together kind of an alphabet soup with a framework of policies that are really just not designed to work well together. As a result, security and IT teams are constantly trying to navigate the burden between security compliance and user access. And that's really what the question of zero trust is looking to solve. The right amount of access at the right time. And that's something that I want you to remember, because I think if you walk away from this session and really understand the role of access in zero trust and this kind of concept at the right time, then you'll really walk away with a fundamental understanding of what zero trust is looking to solve. So here's our question that zero trust is aiming to solve for us. Should this user on this device under this context be allowed to access this resource? This sounds like a very deceptively easy question, right? But once we start to peel back the layers and we think about applying this question within a typical organization, it becomes very complex, really, really fast. So think about it. Is the user a full-time employee? Are they a contractor? Is it a service? Is the device a company device, a personal device, or a server? Can you tell if the user and the device pair is working in an office, at home, a public cloud environment? Do we allow access through multi-factor authentication or a VPN? Even when you have all this information, how do you determine whether the access should be granted immediately, routed for approval, or denied? And how long should access even be allowed? When we start looking at all the different permutations, it gets really unwieldy very quickly. Moreover, when you have to string together multiple different tools to address all of these answers, you can see how complicated access control becomes in practice. Hold on one second, I think I'm lagging a bit. Okay. So to start to understand access and kind of the problem that we're looking to solve, I think it really helps to start to talk about how we handle access today. There we go. And I just want to let you know that is me standing outside the castle. So for many years, when we've designed security models, we've used what we call perimeter style security. And so in perimeter style security, we basically just secure around the perimeter. And we've always trusted that once the user comes into the perimeter, that they will act and access only the areas that they are intended to access. And there's not a lot of control for lateral movements within the perimeter. So once that user gets in, they kind of are free to move around within different systems or sets of data. We tend to refer to perimeter style security as castle and moat. The castle surrounds, or the moat surrounds the castle, offering protection. But once you cross that moat, you're able to move freely within the castle. And again, that's me with the purple hair. The issue now, and that worked for quite some time, but as we're continuing to become more reliant on IT systems, as we're starting to address all of these different points of connectivity, and we're relying more on advances in technology like software as a service and cloud, the threats, or what we call the threat landscape, has really, really changed. And so we need to come up with a better solution for how we approach access. And again, remember, perimeter style recruiting or perimeter style security, because of the way it's set up, it's really creating risks in this new landscape. And that the perimeter is becoming so almost like fluid and dynamic that the boundaries that we've used for security in the traditional sense, they just don't work anymore. So Zero Trust looks to treat access differently. And so now when we're thinking about access, we think about access more in the sense of that it cannot be inherited or it cannot be implicit. So before, when we had perimeter style security, when you got in, you were kind of given a lot of trust, and that trust was implied. We never thought that employees were going to try to attack the network internally, or that people would be giving out their passwords so that bad actors could access information or the network. So now under Zero Trust, that kind of implicit trust that we gave before, it's gone away. Organizations must verify anything and everything that is trying to connect to the network. Zero Trust is centered on the belief that organizations can't give out that trust automatically. And instead, the organization has to continuously verify anything and everything trying to connect to its systems before it grants access. Zero Trust means there is zero implicit trust or zero inherited trust. Zero Trust is about creating the appropriate amount of access at the appropriate time through the use of multiple access and decision and enforcement points. We're going to talk a little bit about what all of that means. But now, instead of thinking of security using a castle and moat analogy, Zero Trust approaches it a little bit more like a stadium. So I want you to think about the last time you went to a football game, right? Are you allowed to go wherever you want? No. You show your ticket to go through security. But once inside, your free movement within the stadium is relatively controlled and contained. You might be able to go to the bathroom, right? But only on the level that coordinates with your ticket. You show your ticket once you get to your section, usually once you need to get to your seat. If you have a suite, you generally have to show your ticket at the elevator and again at the entrance to the suite, right? So you're constantly showing that ticket over and over again. Also, think about, like, for instance, if you have a ticket and you're sitting in the 200s, you can't get down to the 100s, you can't get down to the fields, you can't get into the locker room. You have to regularly show your ticket to access different parts of the stadium. In the stadium, access has to be continuously validated. And that's how Zero Trust treats access and security as well. So a lot of people ask, is Zero Trust a technology? That would almost be so simple and make all of this so much easier. You have to really think about Zero Trust as more of an approach. It's a model for securing the network, applications, and data resources with a focus on an identity-centric policy for how we control access. Zero Trust isn't a one-fits-all approach. It really has to be tailored to each organization. Zero Trust is a set of principles and tools for workflow, policies, system design, and even operation. Zero Trust is actually technology agnostic. It's an approach, not a single solution. And again, it's not one size fits all. Let's think about the core Zero Trust question that we looked at earlier. What were all of the elements that we need to answer this question? So when we think about this question, right, in order to answer each one of these elements, we have to think about the policy, technology, architecture, culture, and training behind it. So for example, we need to have a well-defined policy that says who can access systems or devices and when. And think about how complicated policy is in a hospital setting where you have so many different provider types and they need very different kinds of access at different times. And issues with access can result in impacts to the care that's provided, right? Technology. We have to have the right technologies that can confirm and control access and verify identity. Technologies that support authentication or enforcing our policies about access. We have to have the right architectural configurations that promote security, help segment our network, and keep bad actors out, that integrate all the tools and technologies we need to control access. And finally, we have to have the right culture and training. We need team members thinking about security and how it impacts our work. We need people to understand the threat that they're creating when they use the same password for all of their devices, right? Or when they're writing their password on a sticky and sticking it to their laptop, or when they accidentally leave their PIV card on the lunch table. All of these elements are what come together to create a Zero Trust architecture. So I just want to kind of just stop there for 1 second and make sure that we're pulling all of this together. So is Zero Trust technology, or is Zero Trust a technology? No, it's this entire framework of policy, technology, architecture, culture, all coming together to create the Zero Trust architecture. So one of the things I get asked a lot is, why is everyone talking about Zero Trust now? It seems to be a big buzz. Zero Trust and elements of Zero Trust have actually been around since about 2010. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the models that attempt to address Zero Trust that have been around. But one of the biggest reasons why Zero Trust is getting so much buzz right now is because there have been some very high profile attacks. Most of us have heard of what happened with SolarWinds, right? There have also been very high profile ransomware attacks against government organizations like the Washington Police Department, large organizations like the NBA, and even healthcare organizations like Spring Hill Medical Center in Alabama, which basically a ransomware attack took them offline for days. So because of that, and because the impact of these attacks, it's really been at the forefront, which has gotten the attention of many government organizations. And that resulted in Executive Order 14028, So 14028 was issued in May of 2021, and it requires agencies to enhance cybersecurity and software supply chain integrity. It's got a lot of different pieces to it, but one of the biggest pieces talks about multi-factor authentication, which means we are confirming users using multiple methods. And it also is talking a lot about zero trust. So the order highlights the importance of zero trust architecture, and it actually mandates that agencies have to start meeting specific zero trust architecture requirements and multi-factor authentication requirements within a specific time period. So the executive order came out, and then OMB followed up with a directive as well that was released in January of 2022. So this was sent to all the heads of federal agencies, and it sets forth a zero trust architecture strategy, and it requires that certain parts of the executive order and other parts of the memo be in place by the end of fiscal year 2024. And that's actually creeping up pretty quickly. So that's also kind of the impetus for a lot of the buzz around getting a lot of this done now. So I know we have attendees from a lot of different organizations. Not everyone is just government. So one of the questions that I get a lot and that I want to talk through is, should my organization address zero trust? The most basic and easiest answer is yes, you should. Threat cases create significant organizational risks for all types of organizations, right? And zero trust will help mitigate the probability and the impact of those risks. We are also starting to see some business insurance and cyber insurance policies requiring elements of zero trust as well. The healthcare industry is especially vulnerable, right, to network attack, ransomware attacks. And so having elements of zero trust become incredibly important as well, because the networks and systems store sensitive medical records that if a ransomware attack happens, it can literally prevent access to systems that contain vital healthcare information and even devices that store medications. Because of the criticality of the environment and the access, usability also creates a huge challenge in healthcare settings that we're going to talk about again in a few slides. So we've covered a lot of information. So I just want to do what I call a zero trust rewind and talk about kind of three main nuggets that I hope that you've picked up so far. So what is zero trust? Remember, it's a framework or a strategy for preventing unauthorized access to data and services. It isn't just a tool. It isn't just a technology. It's a collection of policies, technologies, governance, all coming together. Zero trust is a shift from castle and moat or implicit trust to stadium style. And remember, when we're talking about zero trust, we're talking about appropriate amount of access at the appropriate time. And then the third nugget that I want you to walk away from so far is just being aware that there are two major kind of federal mandates that are pushing government systems to have to comply with certain components of zero trust within a certain amount of time. So we've talked a lot about what zero trust is. Let's talk a little bit about some of the challenges to implementing zero trust. I want to start this conversation with recognizing that some of the common challenges with zero trust actually help lend almost a better understanding of what zero trust is and what we really have to do in order to address it successfully. So from a technology perspective, achieving zero trust is going to require several refresh cycles, and it needs to coincide with our larger organization modernization efforts, like moving to the cloud. In fact, moving to the cloud gives us an environment that really allows us to achieve elements of zero trust architecture much easier. Legacy systems and networks are really built more on this idea of implicit trust. So as we start to refactor applications for cloud, we can use this as an opportunity to shift security to more of that stadium style that we talked about earlier. But this takes a lot of time, right? And so as we're thinking about zero trust, we almost have to play two games: that immediate let's address immediate risk, and that longer game where we're refactoring applications and moving them to the cloud. One of the other big challenges that we see with Zero Trust is that there isn't like a one-size-fits-all formal adoption model. And some of the adoption models that we do see, they tend to just focus on the network layer. That's really almost like tactical. And I think one of the easier components to solve, it's the culture, the training, the policies, and the governance that are all equally as important. But those are so specific to organizations that we have to tailor it to each organization. And then finally, one of the biggest challenges we see with Zero Trust is just that it involves a lot of strong change management and full engagement from a variety of teams across the organization, and most importantly, leadership buy-in. So there's one big thing that I think we don't like to talk about in the security space, and that's sometimes this friction between the user community or the business owners and security. A lot of times the user community or the business owners feel like security keeps them from doing what they need to do. And we almost have to shift our mindset and see security as a way to enable what the business owners or users need to do in order to reduce that friction. So when we're talking about Zero Trust, remember, we're talking about appropriate access at the appropriate time. So there's a big challenge with that a lot of folks are overlooking with Zero Trust, and that's usability. If we are limiting access, right, and your user's going to log into a system, or they used to be able to access data, and now they can no longer access that data or that system, or they have to access it in a different way, it really creates sometimes almost behaviors that engage in risky behaviors that circumvent some of the access issues. And we see that usability is an even bigger challenge in healthcare settings, right? Healthcare organizations use some of the most complex networks and ecosystems of internet-based devices, including, X-ray machines, CAT scanners, ultrasound machines. In fact, one study showed that the average hospital room, I think, contains more than 10 different medical devices that can be connected to the network, right? Then add into that desktops, laptops, mobile devices, and the total number of assets on a network per hospital is crazy complex. Then add into that the healthcare setting faces really significant issues associated with timely access, right? If I'm a provider and there is a medical emergency going on and I can't access something, or I have to go through a multi-factor authentication process that I have to get a code on my cell phone and use my card, well, now all of a sudden, right, you have providers that are frustrated, have to do extra steps in order to do their job. And we're kind of adding additional steps for a community that's already facing burnout, right? Providers can't afford to have their access denied to a patient's records at a critical moment. IT staff has to figure out a way to work with security staff and end users to create access solutions that provide that right access at the right time without compromising compliance. And this is really where usability testing and getting users involved early and often as we're designing these Zero Trust solutions becomes really, really incredibly important. All right. So where do we start? So most organizations already have elements of Zero Trust in place because they have some type of security or they have to comply with NIST or FISMA standards. We do recommend an agile approach that matures over time. So one of the things that we've been doing with some of our customers is kind of breaking it down into these 4 steps. Discover. First, we have to know what we have from a network, data, device, and workflow perspective. Once we have that baseline, we know where our strengths are and we know what we need to focus on next. Observe. We have to create dashboards and trackers that allow us to look at Zero Trust goals, map them into current states and milestones, so that from this data, we can make informed decisions about changes that we need to make in addressing gaps over time. Respond. We have to start to build, extend, test, and deploy strategies around Zero Trust. And here's where usability testing becomes really key. We have to recommend working on one process at a time, getting it right, because the implications to not having appropriate access, the impact is so high. And then finally, through Protect, we look at how we can continue to improve controls all the time, over time, including access and tools, and protecting our most critical systems and processes first. One of the things that we think is incredibly important is finding an experienced partner, not just with security, but a partner that can help with strategy and change management, because those are really, really key to getting this organizational change done right. There are some models and frameworks that are available. I'm not going to go into these in too much depth. Forrester has one that's been around since 2010. Gartner also has one. But what we're really seeing emerge as the most common one is the DHS CISA model. And so that model is really unique in that it really takes kind of an agile approach and maturing over time as well. It also, I think, takes the most holistic look at the organization. So in the DHS CISA Zero Trust model, we're looking at these kind of 5 different pillars across the organization. And we're also layering visibility and analytics so that we're measuring how we're doing on our journey to Zero Trust. We're looking at automation and orchestration. So how can we automate some of these elements associated with access? And then we're also considering governance. So for many of our customers, this actually gives us a really solid start because we're looking at the organization holistically, but also this model focuses on advancing the pillars where it makes the most sense for your organization. So you can kind of look at these different pillars, say, hey, here's where we're mature. Let's keep moving here. Or, oh, hey, here's where we're the weakest. Let's focus our attention here. And each pillar can mature kind of at its own pace. It also defines a model for maturity. So within the CISA Zero Trust maturity model, we have traditionals, kind of like where we are today with a lot of the perimeter style security. We have advanced, which is we're starting to achieve Zero Trust, and then optimal, which is where we have a lot of automation, a lot of orchestration, and we can do automated access authentication as well. All right, so I'm going to do one more rewind for you guys, and that's on just the implementation. So we always recommend for everyone that we work with that you start with where you are and what you know. Plan immediate changes and long-term changes that coordinate with larger IT modernization strategies. You can't address Zero Trust in a vacuum, right? You have to think about your cloud strategy, other security strategies, any of your other modernization strategies. All of these have to work together. We recommend taking an agile approach over time. Zero Trust is not kind of like, let's do it once and get it done. You really have to identify kind of where are some of the biggest risks, focusing attention there, and then making sure that you've got a game plan for how you improve those over time. And then look to industry best practices and models. The DHS CISA model, again, is one of the best, I think. It's also one of the most mature. The other thing that's really great about the DHS CISA model is that it aligns really nicely to M2209, which is the OMB guidance that was released in January. And so if you take that guidance, there's a really nice mapping for what OMB is saying you have to be compliant with and when, and how things are kind of prioritized within that CISA model as well. Make sure you address usability. I cannot stress this enough. And I think that's something that we really overlook in security, is making sure we're thinking about, these access requirements that we're putting in place. How do they impact our users? How do they impact their ability to access the systems, do their jobs? And are we creating barriers to entry that are then creating kind of bad behaviors that increase potential security risks? I wanted to leave you with a couple of sources. So if you're interested in learning any more about Zero Trust and you have a lot of extra reading time on your hands, I put some of the links to some of the critical mandates that we've been seeing. So we have the NIST special publication on Zero Trust, At the bottom is also the Zero Trust Maturity Model. And then in the middle, I also included the IACT guidance for Zero Trust as well. If you need more information, this is something Tantus has been working with on our clients and customers. I'm happy to tell you how we've helped them. We've done everything from white papers and assessments to actually achieving full Zero Trust architecture. And then finally, in closing, I have my little Mario here blowing up the castle because we are no longer thinking about security as castle and moat, and we're thinking about it more in stadium style. So please feel free to reach out if you have any more questions. I know this can seem like an overwhelming topic, but at its core, it's really about access. And I'm happy to explain anything else if you guys have any questions. Thank you so much for having me today. And I'll be around if anyone has additional questions.